or comment anything. I just want to know whether it was still there or not. Thank you.
Welcome. Thanks very much for that. Anybody else want to raise anything? Okay, I'm going to move on then to item 7 on our agenda, which is a review of the government's procedures, the risk impact of COVID, which I think is quite a detailed paper. But before I do, I wanted to hand over to Deborah, our Chief Executive, the Combined Authorities Chief Executive, to set the scene. And she'll take questions at the end of the main session, but I thought it would be useful for us to get a bit of a feel as to how the organisation's coped, and who better to hear that from the Chief Executive. Deborah?
Thank you, Chairman. And I'll set the scene, but I also have Tim Martin and Linda Horn on the call as well, who are the other 2 statutory officers that can help answer any more detailed questions that I struggle with. I'd also just like to flag up that Julie Goldsworthy, Director of Strategy and Economy, is on the line as well, and you might want to ask questions around some of the work we're doing on economic recovery too. So I just want to start by saying that I'm sure you all appreciate that COVID-19 has been pretty grim, and when we felt we were seeing some light at the end of the tunnel a few weeks ago, you know that the increase in numbers that we're experiencing across the region demonstrate that it certainly hasn't gone, and we certainly have to remain vigilant in our response to that. The Combined Authority is no different in experiencing some of the challenges around that COVID-19 has presented to the region. And like a lot of organisations, we've had to respond quickly and decisively, both as an organisation that delivers services, but also just as importantly as an employer. So we're doing our best for our customers, but we're also very clear that we need to safeguard our staff. And those 2 issues have been at the heart of our response. And I've been really proud of the organisation, actually, and I've been really pleased at how we've quickly adapted to our service provision. So, for example, Transport has worked really closely with transport operators, the Local Resilience Forum and Department for Transport in central government to maintain a reduced transport network on one hand, but also ensuring that there is transport available to ensure that critical and key workers such as NHS staff, carers and distribution workers are able to get to work. And we reported the details of that at the CA board in June. As I mentioned before, I'm really proud about how resilient our staff have been with those changes, and they have been enforced rather than planned and engaged on. And from those working on the front line, out on the transport network, to those who have worked internally in the organisation. And I think 6 months ago, we would never have believed that we were able to deliver a payroll system, effective and sensitive customer care service and IT servicing from our homes. And we've been able to do that and do that incredibly well. I'm also satisfied with how we've supported the regional response and recovery planning through our participation in the Strategic Coordinating Group, which is the equivalent of gold control for those of you in local government. And we're also leading on the Recovery Coordination Group. We've worked really well with our local government partners to establish arrangements for political discussion. And we've been setting up and servicing the Mayor and Leaders Recovery Forum, as well as facilitating forums such as the Economic Impact Group and the Young Combined Authority. And we've also used our regional convening role to address issues like Black Lives Matter movement, but also looking at the health implications of COVID-19 on our most disadvantaged communities. I'd also just like to draw your attention to a number of specific things, like the decision-making process. So at the beginning, it was impossible to maintain normal meeting arrangements. So as you know, some decisions were postponed, but I was able to use my delegated power to act, and the Statutory Officers Group, which consists of myself, Tim and Linda, have come together on a regular basis to ensure that a thorough process is in place. And then you know that Parliament enacted regulations which allowed us to hold formal meetings remotely. We've had 2 board meetings in that way. We've had 2 formal scrutiny meetings. You, as a committee, have met previously remotely, and we've also been able to effectively run a number of our thematic boards through the use of webcasting. So we continue, however, to evaluate the effectiveness of remote working. It's really important, both at a decision-making process, but also in terms of productivity and our staff, especially as we're now looking at ways in which we can bring more staff back into the buildings. I won't say back to work, because staff won't forgive me for that, because I think, if anything, productivity in our workforce has increased. It's been quite phenomenal the way that the staff that work for the Combined Authority have really worked above and beyond. I think it's important that I reassure you that health and safety measures have meant that we are entirely COVID compliant. My hands have never been so clean. But it's really important that people are given confidence about the way in which we are doing our business, and those that do attend 16 Summer Lane, I'm sure you will agree it is a very COVID compliant building and will continue to be so. Now, there have been implications for our revenue budget, and I won't go through those in detail, but they are contained in points 2.9 through to 2.15. And we will present the midterm financial plan position at the next relevant committee, Chairman. So it continues to be an extremely demanding time for the organisation, and I would argue for the region as well. And we're still in a phase of supporting the response to the pandemic, as well as trying to plan robustly and intelligently for recovery. And Julia and her team have done a phenomenal job in pulling together an economic recharge document, which looks at the way, which presents a number of effective measures for ensuring economic recovery for this region. And we have over £3 billion worth of asks into government. Now, this is really important, and our positioning is, as the West Midlands is the largest regional economy outside London. And if you accept that, then whatever we see in terms of recovery for our economy will have an impact on UK PLC. So we're working really tightly and closely with government, with them, on ensuring that recovery arrangements, economic recovery arrangements are put in place, and getting them to the point at which they acknowledge that what's good for the West Midlands is good for the country. I'd also just like to reassure you as well is that risk assessments have been done continuously throughout the COVID period and will continue to be so. One of the challenges for me is sustaining the effort with the capacity that we have. The more that government require us to do in terms of recovery, means the more capacity that I need in the organisation. And we've done a recent piece of work with leaders around the size of the organisation, the capacity in the organisation, and to reassure them that any growth that we see in the Combined Authority is done proportionately and intelligently, and is done in order to meet the demands of central government. So where we have been successful in capturing resources through some of our submissions, we are very clear about the capacity that we need in order to deliver on that. But we are doing an assessment, a broader assessment of the organisation, looking at business transformation, because I'm very, very conscious that our local government partners are having to do the same. And it's only right that we work hand in hand with you to ensure that the way in which we transform our businesses support the work that you do, not undermine it. We've also had to ensure that we're positioned to inform policy and fiscal events that will aid our future role. So I mentioned the economic recharge document, but we're also working with government to submit a proposal or submit our thoughts on the new Devo white paper that we're hoping to see published within the next month, but also the comprehensive spending review, and details of those are contained in items 3 and 4. We've had to take a really pragmatic approach to how we've operated as a public authority. We've had to ensure that decisions are informed, responsible and transparent, and that there's an evidence-based and audit trail for them, whilst ensuring that the pace of decision making has matched the circumstances that we've found ourselves in. And I hope that you have been reassured that we have undertaken every decision and action in a well-informed and risk-assessed way. I've personally been satisfied that we've sought to do this responsibly and proportionately. So I'm going to end my introduction there, Chair, and really happy to take questions along with Tim, Linda and Julia. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Before I ask Tim and Linda if you want to add anything, and this, do you want to make your...
So David has paused. Oh, right. You just paused there, David.
Sorry, Councillor Alex Phillips has got his hands up. Do you want to raise your point, Alex?
Yes, so thank you for that presentation. There's just 2 points I want to go pick up on. Looking at the paper, there's a lot of detail on our immediate operational response to COVID-19. What I don't see much of is the opportunities that COVID-19 brings. So, for example, the great shift to working at home and the real structural shift you'll see in the economy. So less retail space, other space being used, how we're going to respond to those great big challenges as a region over the next 5 years. And within that, there was quite a striking comment, Deborah, that you said. You were talking on the one hand of staff returning to the office, and on the other hand, you said productivity was higher at home. So why return to the office? I guess there's 2 questions. What detail is there to go and use COVID-19 as an opportunity to reshape the way we function as a region and the opportunities rather than just an operational response? And I say, secondly, if our productivity is higher, why go back?
Okay, so if I take your last point first, so we have been engaging with staff throughout COVID-19 to ensure that they have the tools they need in order to do their job, that they're supported appropriately, that they're still able to engage with their broader teams. And I think that's really important. What we're seeing now is that there is a bit of COVID fatigue, and certainly for some of those younger members of our staff who live in shared accommodation or live on their own in flats, they are struggling a little bit, really. So we've done a number of surveys with our staff to find out how they want to dock back into the organisation. Now, we're encouraging certain staff to come back in, but we can't have all of our staff back in the building, because if we adhere to COVID regulations and social distancing, we can only have up to about 40% at maximum in the organisation. So there's a conversation about leaders and managers. How do we ensure that our staff still feel supported, still feel enabled, still deliver the productivity that we need them to deliver within this new world? Now, Councillor Phillips, I think you're right. I think COVID does give us real opportunities, and I'm working at home at the moment, and my working week is working at home 2 days and coming into the office for 3 days. But I do accept that my support for the mayor is different to other members of staff. But I do think it's given a lot of people cause to reflect on their working lives, and do they want to spend up to 10, 20 hours commuting a week, or do they want to use that time more productively? Now, if I felt that the organisation wasn't able to operate, then there'd be a different conversation being had with staff. But I think we've been absolutely clear in demonstrating to the region that we have still delivered what we need to deliver during COVID, with the majority of our staff working either at home or remotely. And what I would say is a number of our staff are still working, but working in different locations. So, but it does give us a real opportunity. And then there is an existing conversation being had at the Economic Impact Group around the impact on our businesses, on our office space within the region. I don't think we've come to any conclusion yet, and I still think that organisations, certainly professional services, are thinking about how they bring people back into the city centres and town centres. But I don't think it can just be on the basis of, you know, supporting Pret and our coffee shops. You know, we've also got to think about the implications and impact it has on people, and also the choice that we should be giving to people who come into work as well. I don't know whether any of my colleagues want to contribute to that, or whether Councillor Phillips, that's an adequate response.
No, that's fine as a response. I just think it's you say it's not just about saving Pret, it is about the opportunities which are there going forward. So I'm sure there'll be some positive economic developments. And I don't think you're alone in organisation of that. But it's always, we're so in the detail of getting through this. It's saying, well, it's going to reshape the economy, and there's some real positives we can get out of that as well. And it's a horrid time, but we should be blind to the opportunities, and just in strategic thinking going forward, I'd like to see a little more of that. But no, thank you, that's a good explanation.
Yeah. And also, you know, this isn't linear, is it? So it's okay to say we want everybody back in, but if you've got parents that rely on childcare, for example, and, you know, nurseries and childminders aren't operating at the moment, that again is an issue that not just as an organisation we need to be mindful of, but as a region as well. So we might want people back in, but they may not be able to because of other parts of, you know, the economy not working as well as it should. So.
I've got Ram and Councillor Pat Allen, but I've also got Julia Goldsworth who wanted to make a comment. And since I suspect Julia wants to build on what Deborah said, can I let Julia go first, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, it was really just to say that the last CA board report on economic recovery, and there'll be a further update at the next board report, just give some of that wider context. So we have been working across different timescales. So the recharge document was obviously focused on the very, very short term things that we could do and mobilise quickly to help support a speedy exit from lockdown. What is happening in parallel with that is a wider fundamental reset of our local industrial strategy, and said board are kind of leading us through that. And as Deborah said, what we just have to ensure is that we are kind of thinking very carefully about possible scenarios that might play out over the next both kind of medium and long term, and then thinking about where there are risks and opportunities to the economy. So we've got parallel tracks of short-term work, you know, that's feeding the beast of central government and their kind of demands of set piece events, but we're also thinking very carefully about the kind of the range of implications that might be for the wider structure of our economy and how we respond to that, both in a positive, you know, to the positive opportunities as well as the negative challenges.
Thank you, Judith. Ram, you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. I just a couple of questions actually. I mean, it's quite impressive the way Deborah has mentioned how it's working. It's encouraging, because we were talking earlier before we started the meeting how we save the time through this way rather than going on the road and getting wet and looking around. I know you mentioned on the issue of economic issues, particularly from section 2, and on 212. I think when I was looking at it, I was thinking, well, Office has done a wonderful magic hat trick, saving out of 11.1 million and reducing it to 2 million. That was I thought it's appreciable on one hand. On the other hand, I was thinking whether it was inflated on the first place, the program. Do we really need everything what was there before we can manage without it? That is the thinking came to my mind. The second part further down, which is also the issue coming to mind, is further 3 or 4 dots to 2.12. Review of existing funding mechanism, including the levels of constituent and non-constituent member contributions. I'm just trying to figure out, are you thinking of putting that money back onto the 7 authorities plus the others, how to get that money out. I'm just seeing there's some thinking behind it, how that can be managed, because obviously that's
before
Deborah
replies to that, Ram, I think I'd like to contain that second question a little bit. There's a political element in there which I don't think Eric should be getting involved in. I think I would invite Deborah to respond to the element of risk that may be contained around the constituent bodies and their ability to afford. I don't think we ought to be getting into a debate about the politics of whether we should or shouldn't be asking for more contributions. So the risk side of it, I think, is an Eric point. So Deborah, I'm putting a fence around a little bit of that question because I don't think it's Eric's responsibility to get involved. But I'm happy for you to now respond.
Thanks. And if I respond to the second part of your question, and then Linda, I can see you've got your hand up to share your magic with the committee about how we've been able to close that 11.1 million gap. So the second bit, and I think I need to be absolutely clear, councillors, there is no intention for us to talk to local authority partners around increasing their contributions. There is a risk that if we don't have enough revenue in the organisation, we will not be able to deliver on the priorities that the board has set the organisation and the region. So that's one of the reasons why we are being so vociferous, I think, in our submission to government, but both through our response to the white paper consultation, but also through our asks in the comprehensive spending review, saying that the process of sustainability or having a clear, sustainable process for the running of the combined authority is really, really important. It's not right that we should be asking our local authority partners to fund the combined authority to any greater extent than they do currently. So you'll see that it's not just about sustainability for the combined authority, but it's also about sustainability for our local authority partners as well. That's a really important element in both the white paper submission and the comprehensive spending review. You know, and I think a really important distinction to make is that it's not the combined authority and the 7 Met organisations. We are the 7 Met organisations, you know, so we are one organisation rather than one or the other as well.
Can I come back to the question which I was originally thinking to ask, was the issue of risk, supply chain management, because under the pandemic, some of the firms are finding difficult to survive on the first place. It's on 2.19. I'm looking at it and then thinking what kind of risk there is if those supply chain, if they are private firms and their sustainability may well be in doubt. How are we going to manage that? I mean, it's a risk issue which I thought we should have some kind of understanding on it. Thank you.
Yeah, and so if I can ask Linda Horn to kind of respond to both your first question around how we close the gap, but also about the risk profile. But what I would also say is that we have been very responsible in terms of our supply chain management and paying some of our suppliers just in order to keep them solvent during this time as well. So some of our suppliers, for example, around the bus operators, you know, if we lose those bus routes, it would be quite catastrophic for the region, for example. So we've assessed risk on that basis, on the need to support some of our service providers, because the alternative would be quite catastrophic for the region. But if I can hand over to Linda, and she can take you through the budget stuff. Thanks, Linda.
Yeah, so I'll just pick up those those points. So as Deborah just said there, in terms of the medium-term financial position, we did report that to the Combined Authority Board back in June. There's ongoing work happening and discussions with the finance portfolio holder, Councillor Slay, along with the 7 Met leaders and the Mayor, and we're having a further conversation during September around the financial position. But as Deborah said there, this is not about us trying to say, actually, you know, we need more money from the 7 metropolitan authorities. What this is saying is we are clearly talking to government around the devolution white paper and around the CSR, not only about the reset and recovery piece for the region, but also about the longer term sustainability of local government and mayoral combined authorities. So those discussions are ongoing, and as the chairman has said there, actually, you know, we will report those outcomes in due course through the Combined Authority Board. In terms of the in-year financial position, so we undertook an initial assessment. Obviously, the financial position is only as good as the information I have in any 1 hour, never mind any one day, the way that things have been changing. But yeah, so our initial assessment was back in the early first quarter that we would be looking at a deficit of around about 11 million this year. Obviously, as an executive team, there was key actions taken as a result of that. So there was, in terms of around discretionary expenditure, so looking at putting a halt on non-essential spend, such as things like marketing, etc. Obviously, we were saving money around standard costs, sort of overheads, if you like, around utilities, etc., postage, all that sort of stuff. And we've also been quite proactive around our vacancy management during the period. The key magic, if you like, however, has been around the government's funding that they've been allocating to us. So at the point where we assessed that revenue deficit, we'd only got funding awarded from government in terms of mitigation of our income losses up to the 3rd of August. And governments have we're working really closely with CLG and really closely with the DFT around the ongoing funding subsidy that government are giving to local government and to mayoral combined authorities. So the big chunk of the mitigation around that 11 million is that we have, since that we made that assessment, government has confirmed the continuation of our light rail grant funding. So the income losses that we're suffering on light rail have been mitigated through to the end of October at this point, and we're in discussion with DFT about actually mitigation further into sort of December, January time. They've also confirmed that actually that they would continue with the bus subsidised bus service funding. So that's also continued, and now that is on an 8-week rolling cycle with DFT. So again, that money's come in. And we also have had confirmation that we can, as mayoral combined authorities, claim there is a 75p in the pound income loss that public bodies can claim from CLG. Originally, that was just awarded to local authorities, but since we wrote that report, they've confirmed that mayoral combined authorities can also claim for that 75p in the pound for other income losses on sales fees and charges. So we will be taking, so all of that taken into account, I think we're in a position where we will be looking at a deficit of around about £2 million a year. We did at year end set aside, so you all reviewed and signed off the year-end accounts, and we set aside 1.3 million in the accounts as a result of the risks associated with what we were seeing. So we have a level of reserves that will give us the resilience around that to meet that 2 million deficit. So that's why things have changed, and there'll be a full report going to the Combined Authority Board in September on this financial position in year. So at this point, I'm comfortable that we can, if you like, sticking plaster over this financial year, and the ongoing work and the discussions around the medium-term financial financial position are continuing, and we'll report back on that. Just in terms of the supply chain management, as Deborah's just said there, we've been working really closely with our key suppliers. Obviously, our transport providers have been critical, and we've been working with government. And what we've been doing is, in accordance with the agreement with government, we have been paying our transport operators on pre-COVID demand levels, which has meant that has eased their cash flow. They've got the sort of pre-COVID levels of payments that they would have normally received, which has meant that actually we've been able to sustain the majority, not all, because you'll be aware that De Courcy unfortunately went into administration, but it has enabled most of them to continue through as viable entities until we come out the other side of this pandemic. We also did the same with our adult education budget. So again, all the colleges and the providers that provide all our adult education budgets, we paid them on pre-COVID demand levels. Most of them, however, to be fair, moved very quickly to online training, which meant actually there wasn't a significant gap between what we were paying them and what the service that we were getting. The other thing we've obviously done, and at the minute I've continued that to at least the end of October, is to pay all of our suppliers on immediate payment terms on their invoices. So as soon as their invoice comes in, as soon as it's approved, I'm paying them instead of the usual 30-day assessment. And then separately within the finance team, and obviously working with our procurement teams, we are continuing to review and monitor the key suppliers' financial positions. In terms of if there's any press or any uncertainty emerging around any of our key suppliers, then we are alert to that, and obviously we'll take action in due course if there is anything that comes up.
Thank you, Linda. Alan Butt, Councillor Alan Butt, you've been incredibly patient. I think it's your turn.
I just wanted to comment on what Deborah picked up on. With lone working in particularly for people who are living on their own and working from home, and also where there's multiple occupancies, people are working in sort of 6 or 7 maybe people flats where they're all sharing accommodation and bits and pieces. There's already reports out saying that the welfare and well-being of some of these lone workers is at risk with prolonged lone working. So I think it is an important factor to take in when we consider the brave new world and how convenient it is to work from home for people who can and who can cope. But it's not the be all and end all, I don't think, in COVID, and I think we've just got to be mindful of that, and I think I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you, Alan. Deborah, do you want to quickly respond before I give the Tim and Julian an opportunity to comment?
Just Councillor Butt, this is something that we've been really thoughtful about all the way through all of this. So the way in which we've been engaging with staff, I think, has been quite phenomenal, actually. And they have the opportunity to join an all-staff webinar and conversation each week, that managers engage their teams, some on a daily basis, actually. We've also put in place arrangements for mental health support and wellbeing support, and some teams have been meeting off-site as well in a COVID-safe way, of course. But we've given staff every bit of support that an organisation should be giving to their workers, and I'm satisfied we have gone above and beyond in making sure that our staff are right, because the organisation runs on its staff, and if we can't ensure that they're in a good place, then our delivery is not going to be great. So we've invested a lot of time, effort and resources in supporting our staff, and hopefully if you were to ask any of them, I would hope that they would acknowledge that.
Thank you, Deborah. Ahmed, Councillor Ahmed Boston has a question. Ahmed, it's your turn.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. It's reassuring to hear the steps that have been taken by Deborah, Linda and the senior leadership team in terms of the mitigation of risk. But my question was further to that regarding supply chains. There's obviously the risks involved in supply chains in general, and I think that's been pretty much covered by Linda. But how about the smaller local firms that the combined authority work with? A particular anxiety of mine for a long time, not just in terms of the combined authority, but even in terms of local authorities generally, is the fact that we've all got more work to do to give out work and procure out work to local firms and particularly SMEs. So I wondered how we're managing the risk in supporting them during this time, both in terms of the risk for the combined authority if any of them were to come into difficulty, but also in ensuring that the particular needs that these firms have are also addressed in the way in which payments, etc., are given. Thank you, Chair.
Could you? Don't mind. Red, do you want to go first?
If I can just talk about the kind of so it's not, so what I would say is that the relationships that we're responsible for, Linda can talk you through all of that, but there's a broader issue, isn't there, around how we support SMEs across the region. And you'll know that at the start of COVID, there were a whole plethora of business support grants that we worked with our local government partners to ensure were distributed adequately and efficiently and proportionately. There is still a need, I think, for us to review that process about how effective it's been. We also work, as you know, very closely with the LEPs who run growth hubs and provide direct business support. But there are, you know, that this is an issue that the chambers in particular are very, very keen for the combined authority to kind of work in partnership with others on. So the Economic Impact Group is the place where we discuss and talk about the support to our businesses, both large and small, across the region. But Julia, you might want to add to that, if there's anything else to add.
Deborah's throwing the ball at you, Julia, so do you want to add anything?
So just, and more widely, I suppose I would say that the Economic Impact Group is a really important forum for just helping us keep as close as possible to a real-time view on how the kind of economic consequences are playing out in real time in the region. And that does have a big a really broad cross-section of the economy represented there. So we do have the key economic development institutions represented there, key business representative organisations, key sectors represented, and also the trade union. So we've done our best to have as broad a view as possible that then picks up issues across sectors, but across different sizes of business as well. Just if I may, Chair, just use this opportunity just to give a bit more context on our economic response, really just to draw the committee's attention to the fact that as part of the response, government has confirmed that combined authorities have a lead role in the regional economic response. So we've had that kind of high level mandate, but we haven't yet had the fully worked out kind of implications of that set out to us. That is still work in progress. So we don't have that full clarity, but it does reflect much of the practical reality of our response. Deborah and I have already talked about how we're engaging with business and the central importance of the Economic Impact Group, but also we're ensuring from a governance point of view, given the uncertainty that we're continuing to work our way through, we are updating board at every board session on what we think the latest economic state of play is, and all else that I would flag at this point is that it's not just the economic uncertainty that we're working through. There is continued kind of policy and funding uncertainty, which is where the spending review fits in. But we are having to work through engaging with government on what the practicalities of their levelling and delivering their levelling up agenda looks like, and also preparing for kind of the exit from the transition period from leaving the European Union. So there are some quite big moving parts that we're having to navigate in terms of kind of setting and plotting a course through our kind of economic strategy for the region.
Thank you, Julia. You've still got the ball before you hand it on to anybody. Do you want to just give any insight you have about what you think the government response is going to be to some of our pleas for cash, and whether you're optimistic or whether it's a complete unknown?
So I think I mean, you know, we are being opportunistic where we think there are routes to secure resources, and when they materialize, I think we have the benefit of actually having done a lot of the thinking through in advance. So the evidence base we built through our local industrial strategy, the work we did on recharge, which was entirely kind of speculative at the point at which we started that piece of work. It was our central assumption that there would be some kind of financial statement, but it wasn't confirmed. Just means that I would say we have been able to be approximately half a step ahead, so that when the Get Building Fund resources came through, we had a starting point from which to engage. We weren't coming to it completely cold. You know, the spending review is a different kind of conversation. It is the moment when you know, governments consider the whole of their public spending. It's not just about trying to land particular projects. So part of our work has been around identifying the kind of big structural mechanisms that we want to see to further our agenda, as well as the specific projects. But you know, we don't have a date confirmed for the spending review. We've been told that it will be a multi-year capital and revenue settlement that will be set out, but I think that could still potentially be blown off course by what happens, you know, in the next few weeks and months in terms of how well we as a country are able to control a resurgence of the pandemic. So I think, you know, we are making some sensible assumptions, and we're being careful not to underplay our hand. But the goalposts could shift quite significantly, I think, over the next few weeks and months. So we've just got to be ready to continue to respond to that in an agile way. Thank you, Julia. Deborah?
Yeah, just and Julia's quite right. But what I would say is we're not reinventing a whole set of asks to government, and the challenges that this region faced going into COVID are still there, and in some respects are exacerbated. So, you know, the impact of a no-deal Brexit was being discussed before we went into COVID, and sadly, I think that might be a reality for us coming out of COVID. So we're being really thoughtful about that. The need to achieve carbon neutrality by 2041 is still stark and is still something that we're looking at. But equally, the opportunities around high speed 2 were there going into COVID, and I would argue that the opportunities are a lot bigger for us now coming out of COVID, and we really need to make that work. But actually, I don't think we should ignore the inequalities across the region and in our communities that we experienced, that we knew about going into COVID. Again, COVID has shone a spotlight on those inequalities, both at an economic and social level for our communities, that we are, you know, working across the region with all of our partners, not just local government, with health, police, etc., to look at ways in which we can use our economic power to try and close some of that inequality gap that we're seeing.
Thank you, Deborah. Ahmed, can I just quickly check? Do you feel that your question was answered satisfactorily? Is there anything else you want to raise?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it was answered satisfactorily, and I'm grateful for that, because I think having that clarity, as Deborah said, the two big challenges in terms of the combined authority directly, but also in terms of the combined authority as a regional authority looking over the region. I think it's just important for us to be conscious of that. But if I may put across a quick follow-up, which is related to this in terms of COVID. October is a month of significant challenge, and many are worried about redundancies that we might see during that time. And I know we've had this discussion, Chair, regularly in this committee around capacity and capability. Are we confident that the combined authority has the capacity and capability to address what will inevitably be the increased demand for skills development among people in our region, particularly among communities that will be have already been disproportionately affected by COVID and will be affected by it in terms of the impact on furlough finishing and possible redundancies?
Deborah, can I leave that question for you to finish? And then what I want to do is to hand to Tim, just to, if you'd like, bring out any of the other parts from this paper that everybody's had a chance to talk to except him.
Yeah. So Councillor Boston, I think that's a really important question and a really important issue that you raise. And because it's so important, we have been working on this for a while now, because all the indicators that have been, the economic indicators that have been presented to the Economic Impact Group all lead us to the same conclusion, that when furlough is lifted, and if you look at some of the market failure across our economy as well, we can see that the impact, the adverse impact, will rest on those young people in our communities, those under 25, but also those from ethnic minority communities as well. So if you look at the work that we're doing on skills provision and business support, hopefully you'll be reassured that we're onto this and we're putting plans in place to support our young people in particular, but also address some of the structural inequalities that some of our ethnic minority communities are experiencing as well. And I'd be more than happy at the right time, Chair, to bring a report that where we can share that work with this committee, because it's a really important bit of our work, I would argue.
Thank you, Deborah. Tim, your report. Would you like to add anything? Is there anything you want to draw out for members, or are you content with how it's been summarised in the conversations we've had?
Thank you, Chair. So most of the points that I was going to make have been drawn out by other colleagues, which is great. I will ask Deborah to introduce my reports in future, because I obviously don't have to do anything. I will just note for the record, obviously, that the strategic risk register is attached as an appendix to this report. Just to say, obviously, we do keep that under regular review. What we have done, obviously, in a number of cases where there are implications from COVID in regards to the risks, we have shown those in the risk register, and shown what we think is a specific part of the COVID risk and how we're trying to mitigate that. But obviously we are evolving that register at the moment, and there'll probably be a more detailed report at your next meeting, because you know, we will hopefully have a better picture of the impact of COVID on the organisation as we go forward, as particularly Councillor Phillips said, you know, what are we doing in the future? And we've discussed some of that, but we will be capturing more of that into the risk register. I think other than that, Chair, I don't really need to add anything else, and we've had a really good discussion on this paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Gurmeet, I think you've popped your hand up. Can I give you the floor? Councillor Singh?
I think you're on mute, Councillor Singh.
Councillor Gurmeet Singh, you had your hand up. Do you still wish to raise a point?
Still on the mute, I think he is.
Can I come back to this one, please?
That's it. We can hear you now.
Yeah, okay. I said, I have a small business. I can see the effect on the SME businesses. The Chancellor has helped us a lot. And due to the building disruption, the building worker disruption, a lot of people haven't still gone back to work, right, in the full capacity. And the autumn is coming. I wonder if the local authorities can help any small business after the furlough thing ends.
I'm going to ask that question not be covered here, because it's not an audit risk and assurance committee type question. It's outside of our brief. It's the type of question, I think, that comes under a policy and is probably more appropriate to oversight and scrutiny. Okay. The reason being is that it goes into the local authority policy making, as opposed to us reviewing what's actually going on. So if you don't mind, I'm going to invite that question to go elsewhere.
Thank you.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
I'd like to just ask one question of everybody. So if you can find your hands button. It's my view that these meetings have actually worked very well on video conference. How would everybody feel on the basis that you put your hands up if you're positive about us continuing to do it by video conference and not rushing to try to meet on a physical basis so that we can continue to provide the governance and not feel that getting back together is the most important issue? Can I just see a show of hands as to whether you would see that as appropriate and something you would support? I've got 2, 3.
That's fine.
4.
That's fine.
Any others? And I assume that actually this is a positive way of us working without just putting pressure on the combined authority to meet physically in the short term.
Okay.
I think that's accepted. Thank you for that. Okay, let me summarize what I think we've got before I move on. I think we've heard a very positive set of updates on what the combined authority is doing and how it's working with the local authority. It's work in progress. I think Julia and Deborah have commented on there's a lot of uncertainty regarding other funding and support for the region. I would suggest that we should have a short update at the November meeting because I think there'll still be a lot of uncertainty around the spending review, but that we should aim at the January meeting to have a detailed update and possibly a debate and discussion of the depth that we've had here, because that will very much affect how the combined authorities are going forward. And from an oversight, from an audit risk point of view, we would want to see that context. Can I take it that I would have everybody's agreement that we just have a very quick update at November, but a much more detailed update at the January meeting? Good. All right. I'll take that as approved. Thank you all very much. Let me just check. I've got a hand up, see if there's anybody. Ahmed, do you have a question?
No, Chair, it was just around the vote you were taking in terms of having online meetings.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, so let me move on from that subject, which I think has been. We're now on to a discussion regarding the data protection and data processing. It's for noting, it's the annual update that we asked for. It looks like a very good report. Can I ask Gurmit to just give a quick summary and then allow me to invite questions? I take it as read that we've all read the paper, so Gurmit, just a quick oversight.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, if I can just very quickly set out firstly the areas of work that we've concentrated on over the last 12 months, and that has really been 5 areas. Firstly, understanding the data that we process as an organisation and how that data flows through the organisation. Secondly, around corporate training and making sure that as an organisation, all staff are clear and understand what they are expected to do and the how data is to be processed. Thirdly, improving breach reporting so that we have a clear understanding of what types of incidents are happening across the organisation so we can mitigate any areas that require mitigation. And probably most importantly, we've undertaken a lot of work around assessing the security levels of processing data, and that has been through instigating penetration testing of IT systems to understand how strong our defence systems are, and also, secondly, understanding the physical security around the building, 16 Summer Lane. Now, of course, all of this work has been heavily impacted by the coronavirus pandemic and in many ways changed the landscape in terms of how we process data, and that in itself produced challenges. One thing I would say is that we were quite fortunate in that as an organisation we have for many years now been home working to a certain level, and what that has meant is that we had policies and procedures and practices in place which were designed to accommodate a certain level of home working. Obviously that was heavily ramped up during the coronavirus and pandemic, and we've had to take additional steps in terms of monitoring the IT systems, and also in terms of getting messages out in terms of how people should homework in a safe environment for data. There's a recognition here that some people will have better facilities at home to accommodate home working, and we are about to instigate a privacy impact assessment around home working, which will look at the risks that currently exist and how we can put further mitigations on there. Finally, if I may touch on some important areas that require attention and will be given attention over the coming year. The first one is around multi-factor authentication, and this is around how staff log on to the IT systems and the security around that. And it is both my recommendation and the recommendation of others that we move to that system, and that's being currently considered, and the practicalities of that are being looked into. Secondly, around how information and data is stored, and there's work being started now around a corporate vision in terms of how we capture and store information. To date, it's been largely left to local levels at directorate level, and there's been identified a gap there, which we hope to rectify around putting in place a more of a corporate strategy around managing data. So that is a very sort of brief run through in terms of where we are and what we've been doing and some of the key areas that we need to focus on. Obviously, the paper includes a lot more detail, and hopefully everybody's had a chance to look at that. But if there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them, and we'll provide any clarification around data protection and our compliance with the legislation which governs that particular area.
Thank you, Gurneet. Ram, you have a question.
Thank you, Chair. I'm the last person to know about IT much. It is a very big issue, but just going through the report, certainly the question came into mind about this home working and so on mixing together. Was there any breach of the data or mixing up with the home work with the official work somewhere? Some kind of if there was, how many incidents happened? Thank you.
If I can answer that question in two parts. The first one in terms of IT incidents, and that is really around things like phishing emails of that type, and what you could describe around cyber type incidents. Our defense systems are constantly picking up that type of activity. So this would be around where individuals may have clicked on links, where we have identified suspicious types of communications coming in. So that's constantly ongoing on a daily basis. And that's not unusual for an organisation, just purely that's the state we live in. Fortunately, our defence systems have been strong, and we've identified those areas, and where we've been able to mitigate them to a point where we've not suffered any loss. The second aspect is more the type of human error, where somebody has inadvertently made a mistake around data. So the numbers there have been relatively low, but we have had incidents. We have beefed up our reporting mechanisms, because I think there's been a bit of a recognition that they've perhaps not been as strong as they could be, and perhaps not all incidents have been coming through to us. I think that will change. So I think we will see a spike in the types of incidents that have happened. But a lot of these have been to date around things like mistakes in terms of attachments put on emails, which should have gone out to wrong recipients, communication errors, all at a very low level, non-sensitive information and largely non-personal information. But again, it's something that we're alert to and we look to keep on top of.
Are you okay with that?
Thank you. Yeah.
Ahmed, you have a question.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the topic of phishing attempts, has any assessment been conducted or any data held as to any further risks that are involved in people working from home as a result of these phishing attempts being attempted? So, for example, what I'm thinking of quite practically is if you're in the office, you receive an email from someone, I don't know, just for argument's sake, Deborah or somebody, and you think it's suspicious, you may be able to pick up the phone in the office and call through and just verify the email. That perhaps isn't as possible or as easier when it comes to home working. Has any work been done to look at the risks of that? Thank you, Chair.
We have looked at that, and I think particularly the IT team have recognised that closeness of link isn't there. But at the same time, the IT team have been very proactive in making themselves available and sending out communication that they are available at all times to address those types of things. We've sent out, and we are planning a further campaign specifically around phishing, which will include posters, e-posters going out to all staff, reminding them of that type of incident and what they can do if that type of situation arises. But I think there is generally a recognition that from a data protection point of view and processing data at home, we need to do, and we are doing an assessment on how that is impacting staff and the impact levels and how we can mitigate incidents and how we can mitigate any risks that arise from that. The numbers of phishing attacks have been consistent and they haven't gone up. And there's not been any noticeable spike, but you're absolutely right. There is something that we have recognised, that there is a gap where people are working from home, and that is a knowledge gap that we need to reinforce with colleagues.
Thank you, Gilman. I notice there's no other questions. I'd like to just throw open to colleagues a question. It strikes me that with the subject that's coming up in a minute, health and safety, with the subject of the paper that Gilman has just led, and with one of the questions that arose earlier, which was, I think from Ahmed, about a wholly new way of working likely to be coming out of where we are, is whether or not we should be inviting a review of a number of features of this for the spring, possibly the April meeting, which is a review of the way we handle data, the review of home working, review of mental health and home working, just to understand, have we learnt the lessons and are we making the right investments? How would members feel if we added to our forward plan, asking the combined authority to bring forward a review paper of a number of components of where we find ourselves and how that's going to impact in the future? Would I look for hands?
Yeah, I would support that, David.
Thank you, Alan. Any other comments? Anybody wants to just add?
I think, Chair, you're right. Actually, we need to see how it's going to be impacting us and what are the risks behind it. I think there should be some kind of information coming back to us. Thank you.
Deborah, can I?
Yes, Chair, I would agree with that as well.
Good, thank you. Deborah, can I ask that we look for slightly cross or significantly cross specialism paper review regarding home working, the effect on the data side of things, the effect on the IT systems, the effect on security, the effect on health and safety, the effect on long-term use of your buildings, because there's a number of audit and assurance risks in there that we'd like to be satisfied we've learned. And I think that would be a very useful paper, probably post the winter. And I would suggest that an April paper updating us on that and forming a view as to how well we've done, what lessons there are, would be very useful.
Yeah, but really happy to do that, Chair. That would be very therapeutic.
I think it probably would be therapeutic, but I think what I've been looking for particularly
Therapeutic.
are there any investment issues that,
of course,
we need to be making, just making sure that they are being given the priority.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to move the topic on. We're now on to Pete, Bond and Health and Safety.
Yes, good morning, Chair. Good morning, committee. Thanks for the invitation. I'm also joined by Ben Gittings, who's our Health and Safety Manager this morning. Just in terms of this is to present and give an update, an annual update on health and safety to the committee following on from last year. I was intending to introduce, if that's okay with the committee, and then also ask Ben if he has any further comments. We weren't intending to take everybody directly through the report, just to pick out a couple of key points and then seek to answer any questions. Obviously, this health and safety report, as we ordinarily provide it, would be coming forward with an update on our strategy and delivery from our 2018 to 2020 plan. That, of course, has now been dominated by what has been probably one of the biggest health and safety and well-being crisis of modern times, not least across the Combined Authority, across Summer Lane, our relevant teams and the transport network. The strategy, as outlined in the report, the delivery of the health and safety strategy from 2018 to 2020, we feel is hopefully this is a report that shares that has been comprehensively delivered. And that has included a significant review of our organisational policy and procedures for health and safety, the safety management systems, and that's also been really a root and branch review, taking members and colleagues back to the point that at 2018, the Combined Authority and all its elements had only been in a short-term establishment. So therefore, there has been a huge amount of work through that to make sure that our safety management system is really comprehensive and covers all parts of the authority and how they work together. We've also established, as set out in the report, this strategic committee and the supporting environment of the Safety, Health and Environment, the SHE committee, reviewed the structure across the Combined Authority and seek to keep the Combined Authority updated on our activities as well. We, in addition to that, hold a monthly briefing with our Chief Executive, Deborah, and provide the relevant reports to all of the internal teams and corporate boards across the organisation. I think it's probably worth mentioning that the establishment of the safety management systems across the sort of newer and growing and developing areas of the Combined Authority have probably been the most comprehensive and taken the most time and effort, but actually that is starting to pay dividends in terms of the way that we are working across those teams and making sure that the processes that we have in place suit the CA right across its organisation. Then, of course, came COVID-19 earlier this year. And what we have had to wrestle with during that time, as I'm sure Ben will go on to mention, is ensuring that we undertake a review and implement changes on the back of the numerous amounts of COVID-19 guidance that have been coming out from various parts of government. And I would like to take the opportunity to share with the committee that the small team that we have, Ben, Neil and myself, in many weeks through COVID-19 have had to churn out guidance associated with what have been hundreds and hundreds of pages coming out of government. We've tried to ensure that we have done that swiftly, that we've responded, but actually one of our key focuses has been to make sure that we are supporting the staff workers groups, and ensuring that we liaise effectively with partner organisations, stakeholders, and the businesses that we interact with comprehensively across the transport network, as well as across other areas of the combined authority. That within transport specifically for a moment has meant quite a lot of detailed and comprehensive work with operators as well of services, and particularly making sure that our infrastructure across the highways, bus stop shelters, our bus stations and interchanges have been effectively managed, and that our staff in those environments have also been well supported. Critically, there has been a huge amount of work going on to make sure that we have a safe summer lane with premises as set out within the report with some of the activities, and we have, whilst we still have the majority of our staff working from home, where there are business critical activities, we have kept the environment safe and effective for all of the people that are required to report and work from there on a daily basis, as we have for frontline staff as well. We've continued to make sure that we have audit processes in place that support that, both in terms of working from home, as was mentioned in the previous conversation, but also for our premises, be that summer lane or our out-based locations as well. And actually there's been a huge amount of work going in to make sure that there's been clarity around the processes for staff, and that's not just through the health and safety team, but the health and safety team working collaboratively across the organisation to make sure, along with assets, our business support teams, various different departments and teams, that people are very clear on the roles and responsibilities, how they're being supported, how we're currently working, and what is expected. One of the impacts also outlined is around the shift in the 18,001, the transition from 18,001 ISO to 45,001, and the change in that date of implementation now looking towards September 2021, based on the COVID impacts and the move in that deadline. But nonetheless, that's not halted our work towards 45,001 as well. Looking forward, obviously we're moving towards a 3-year strategic plan. I think the only thing I'd like to say before inviting Ben for any comment is that what's been important to us, given COVID, although we are looking to implement a 2020 to 2023 strategy, it has been right and proper that we just make sure that we have got ourselves in a position where we start to understand the world in which we're operating and health and safety post-COVID, to ensure that we bring a draft strategy which is making its way, starting to be formed through the organisation, but reflects the world in which we are now, probably as opposed to the world in which we thought we were in, probably going back to March of this year. So that's a critical and key activity that we're working on. That's my overall summary, and just invite Ben, if I may, if there's anything further, Ben, that you wanted to draw out from the report before we ask for questions.
Certainly, thanks, Pete. Through the delivery of the previous year strategy, we've implemented significant enhancements to health and safety, including those recommendations that were made as part of the internal audit process for the internal audit team. It'll be essential that we continue to build on the success in a systemic way, with further integration of health and safety into all of our operational activities. The health and safety strategy for the next 3 years, the overarching aim will be to encourage all departments to fully integrate health and safety into their operational norms, ensuring greater alignment and with the organisational wellbeing strategy. Obviously, there's been a significant impact on mental health wellbeing and the isolation factors of people working from home. So we're working closely with the Equality, Diversity and Wellbeing team to ensure our two strategies are aligned. In terms of the COVID-19 work, throughout the whole lockdown and recovery, we've supported the organisational response, keeping abreast of government and HSE and industry body guidance and best practice. And given the unprecedented challenges presented by the pandemic, we've maintained a H&S decision log, which continues to be maintained, detailing the thought process behind our decisions and the approvals that we've obtained for those. In terms of looking forward,
No, go on.
In terms of looking forward, there are not currently any specific areas of concern or particular items for urgent improvement But as I said, it will be critical in terms of our transition towards 5001 that all departments can demonstrate they have integrated the SMS into their operational norms.
Thank you, Ben. Can I check? Has anybody got any questions or points they want to raise? Right, I see no hands at the moment. I'm glad you encompassed. Ahmed, you've got a question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for this detailed report as well. It's very useful. Two questions, if I may, Chair. First of all, going back to the issue of capacity, given the unprecedented challenges that COVID-19 presents, and you mentioned there in the presentation, Pete, around the work you're doing with transport providers, you mentioned you're a small team. Are you satisfied that the capacity at which you're operating at the moment is adequate in terms of addressing these challenges moving forward? And secondly, you mentioned transport. Is there any further assessment that's been done for potential liabilities or risks that are involved, again, in reference with COVID-19 when it comes to transport, and particularly the role of the Combined Authority and TFWM? Thank you, Chair.
Yes, I'm happy to pick those on up. Thank you, Kat. So in terms of the adequate, I suppose Ben picked up on a critical point in terms of our strategy, and that's making sure that what we do with the provision of health and safety is make sure that it is embedded within the culture and practices of the organisation. Now, taking I suppose the critical point has been because there has been so much additional guidance, requirements, legislation, then it's ensuring that our capacity constraint has been about ensuring that there has been enough time and ability to turn those around as quickly as we need to before they're implemented. And as we've seen through COVID-19, there have been a lot of practices and law and legal changes that have come about within with days or weeks notice rather than months and years as we would traditionally have. So that has presented itself with challenges. I think we've managed to work it so that we have got adequate resource to be able to support that, and I do have to say that is thanks to the huge amount of effort and dedication of particularly Ben and Neil, who have been undertaking that on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis. What we have had to make sure is that we are embedded in the right forums, meetings, and parts of the organisation, internally and externally, to make sure that that messaging can be gotten to the right people at the right times, and the right processes be put in place. I think we're satisfied that we have been doing that adequately, and I think as set out in the report, the audit that was undertaken during COVID, which also highlighted to us that they felt that our processes and practices, particularly around COVID-19, had been really helpful and thorough, and I think that was a really good thing for us to receive as a team, because that gave us the satisfaction that we were probably pointing in the right direction at a time when I think most of us felt that we're asking ourselves the questions on some days: are we doing all the right things? So I think that gave us an element around that, but it is something we are keeping a close eye on. Where that's a little bit more difficult is working with our partner organisations. Touch points. Ben has the right touch points, so do I, so that we are sure that they are also following the right adequate procedures. In some cases, what we have done is we've undertaken some covert monitoring of other partners' practices, just to see that we've offered ourselves and our services up to transport operators and providers to say, look, we're happy to review your own safety management systems, just so that is a second pair of eyes looking over it, and that's created a positive environment with how we are working with many of those organisations. In terms of the liabilities and risks, I think that has been a critical factor, and that's something that's certainly been a focal point for both Ben and myself through the changes that have come forward. I think what we have tried to do is look at each piece of guidance and then ask ourselves where our own liabilities and risks We check that out with the relevant teams, and I think we are satisfied through the risk assessment process and the risk management processes that we've put into place that we are following up on those, and that we have mitigated, as far as reasonably practicable, a lot of those liabilities. On the transport network you mentioned particularly, and if I use one or two examples there, just to make it real, on the transport network, the critical infrastructure that we are responsible for is mainly around bus stations, interchanges, and we have 12,200 bus stops and shelters. And one of the things where we have made significant changes is the operation of bus stations to support social distancing, to support practices. We've had to implement different practices in a way that we never have before. We've created a lot of alighting only bus stops around key central areas so that people get off at one point and then get on a bus at another point. Because if you look at the bus network, for example, the most condensed and constrained point of the bus network is the front doors of a bus. So working with the operators, we try to make sure that where practical and possible, we can separate those out, following all the laws and the procedures. Similarly, at bus stations, we've had to work through the same processes, and we've worked with colleagues because we're not directly accountable or responsible at rail stations. We've worked with partners there in Network Rail and the train operating companies, and similarly through the metro stops, tried to apply similar principles. So we have been working in all of those areas and making sure that we're clear on who is accountable, and where it's not us, working with the organisations who are. So that's just to give a snapshot. Hopefully that answers the question, but if there's anything further, Councillor, let me know.
I shall take it as read that. Ram, you have a question you could raise.
Thank you, Jay. I think he followed on the comments earlier. I'm not sure it's my microphone or somebody else's, so it's causing problem. Anyway, the question was on the end of our, because Peter mentioned there will be a post-COVID review and coming back later on. Then also the issue is in the report itself on section 8, the financial position. I'm just trying to figure out how it's being worked out, the financial management, to address those new issues which are coming forward, because probably many of us never thought of these things before. And now they are up front and we are dealing every day, like bus stops and bus stations and so on. And the railway stations as well. So I'm just thinking, I'm trying to think the capacity issue, how we manage the finance part. Is the financial side aware of these things as well? Because it's a budget pressure in the end, let's be realistic. So I just want to understand that bit. Yeah, thank you.
Can I put a brief request on you, please?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. Just in terms of that, I think two things to be. One is that there have been a lot of requirements on us that weren't necessarily planned, but one of the things that we've had to do through COVID is deal with now and worry about the finances later on some of that. That's because some of those areas have been around where we have required government support, and that is where there are critical issues. I'm not talking about major expenditure there, but more minor elements, and that's something that we have had to do. Safety and health and safety has been paramount, but absolutely one of the sessions I've just come from has been around financial planning, around the longer term, how we make sure we embed this into what we're doing. So that is front and centre of what we're thinking also.
Thank you, Peter. Can I just acknowledge publicly that from where we came, those of ARAC members will recognise health and safety was something that we were worried about for many times. I think we've seen a really good grabbing of this, and it's pretty impressive piece. This is a part-time part of your job. Ben and to Neil, I think, can we just offer our gratitude? This feels now as if we've got a professional approach. The only one thing I would like to add as chair is, can I see a separate work stream? You mentioned it, but I'd like to see a separate work stream that's referenced in your updates regarding mental health and lone working. Yeah. I mean, it's implicit in what you were saying, but I think we ought to be explicit. This is part of the learning curve that we need to be going through. And I think it should be seen as part of our reporting.
Absolutely, Chair. Happy to do that and pick that up.
Okay, many thanks to you for that. Can I now hand over to Hardiel to give us the corporate assurance update, unless Julia, you wish to lead. Is it Hardiel or you, Julia?
I think this is me, Chair.
Okay. Assume that everybody's read it. Just bring out the 2 or 3 key points you want members to be aware of and that you want to just emphasise, please.
Okay, will do, and then happy to take questions afterwards. So, purpose of the report, as previously committed, is to provide ARAC with an update on assurance activities and development since the last reporting period. And the report intends to respond to a specific query from ARAC around the reliability of trend analysis information from assurance assessments with work that has taken place to enhance the assurance toolkit. So from an assurance toolkit point of view, there's been lots of work that's been taking place in the background for several months, and the toolkit has been designed to complement the key stages of our single assurance framework, which the Strategic Hub are now in the process of implementing. And as previously reported, the toolkit is based on industry best practice, so it gives us a lot of confidence that we're looking at the right things. It's intended that the closure and handover phase of the single assurance framework will include an element for assessing overall project performance and include essentially a feedback loop for ensuring that intelligence from lessons can be recycled. So really taking into account what we learn from multiple projects, feeding that back into the very early stages in developing projects for delivery. And it's anticipated that that element, that phase of the SAF, will be delivered as part of a future Tranche 3. To give assurance on the reliability of trend analysis information, the refreshed toolkit that we've developed takes into consideration any historically held information and provides a greater level of detail, giving confidence in the validity of trend information. We also have an integrated assurance and approval plan that's been developed, and that will be implemented as part of the single assurance framework. So work that we are currently progressing is looking to map different assurance activities across the 3 lines of defence for all of the known projects across the organisation. So our longer term aspiration or intention with this IAAP, the Integrated Assurance and Approval Plan, is that it will give us a strategic planning capability for the different assurance activities across a 3 lines of defence model. So what that enables and what that means is that we can, in an informed way, essentially flex the assurance activities relative to what we understand is taking place across a 3 lines of defence. And that, again, is in line with industry kind of best practice and integrated assurance. So on specific findings in the last reporting period, the tools that have been applied in the last reporting period have been a business case assessment tool and a health check tool. Detailed findings of those tools are in the report, I think section 6, but if I could just touch on a few key highlights. So at high level, since January 20, there have been 6 business case assessments that have been undertaken with a number of recommendations that have been made. So some of the key themes for improvement that we've identified are strengthening of the economic case to include improvements to how benefits are defined to justify investment and answer the value for money question. Improving the commercial case and specifically around procurement strategies and detailed procurement plans to align with other project dependencies. Improvements to management cases and the quality of supporting documentation with things like risk management and reporting arrangements that we of course would expect to be articulated to a certain level, and improving financial cases and forecasted expenditure profiles full life cycle. So in addition to that, there have also been 5 projects valued between 250k and 7 million which have had health checks with fairly encouraging results. So we have observed themes and made recommendations around financial management across the full project lifecycle. And those 5 projects will continue to be assessed as they progress through their life cycles. One of our key kind of challenges that we recognise, excuse me, is that recommendations for improvement on the basis of assessments that are undertaken are not always acted upon, impacting on the maturity of investment proposals and therefore likely success. So to mitigate against that, the assurance approach for business case assessments has been designed to look to counter this with a bigger lead-in time for assessments, giving greater opportunity for improvement to the maturity of the business cases. And in addition, again, to counter the risk, an observation report that translates the assurance findings from a business case assessment along with recommendations is intended to accompany the business case to help inform, challenge and decision making at relevant forums as part our single assurance framework. And finally, I guess one of the key things is that the assurance team are looking at ways to track recommendations and progress against those recommendations. And as well as reporting on an ongoing basis trend analysis information to ARAC, we hope to give an indication on our proportion of recommendations acted upon. So that's a very quick summary, I think, of the key points that I've pulled out. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Pardon. Any questions from anybody? Okay, 2 things I'd like to draw out from this paper, and Hardy will very kindly summarise at the end. Deborah, one of the key points I think has to be to look to you and to your senior leadership team that the level of prioritisation that the assurance reporting is giving is that it's discussed where recommendations are coming up, that these are some level of priority for change. Bearing in mind that we're exceptionally good at the senior leadership team at putting things into the funnel, we need to make sure, and I suppose I'm looking for your support to make sure that things coming out the funnel have the same level of prioritisation in terms of the quality and the standards that we're expecting, and that you are content to make that to, if you like, own that the monitoring of the assurance reports and making sure that things are recommendations are being followed through. And secondly, is that we agree at this meeting, and again that you're happy, that ARAC can be the final port of call if the assurance team are not getting the satisfaction they need in terms of actions on their recommendations, so that they have, like internal audit, the ability to report to ARAC if things aren't happening that may cause concern in the combined authority at a later date.
So I would welcome that, Chair, and I think it would enable me to ensure a certain level of discipline in ensuring that that happens. So I would welcome that. And just to also let you know that SLT have regular updates on the single assurance framework. But shall I commit to doing a consolidated report at a time to be agreed with you where we can bring back the outcomes to this this meeting? But I would personally find it very helpful and supportive from the committee to do that.
So what I suggest we do is, in the same way as internal audit produce an update on the reports that they've had going through, largely where there's not much in the way of recommendations, we nod it through, we just note, is that assurance are required to report each ARAC meeting if there are issues on some of the reporting where action isn't being taken. We treat the same level of emphasis and interest as we do with internal reports. Yes. Internal audit report. That I hope will, sharpen your tool in keeping everybody's interest in the assurance report. Are you happy with that?
I'm perfectly happy with that, and it would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Tim, are you happy that we build that in now, like our internal audit reports, on a regular update? And if there's no news, that's good. But if there's some updates where there are some concerns, ARAC are getting informed about it.
Yes, Chair, that is really helpful, and we'll work with assurance colleagues to make sure that happens.
I've seen no hands from anybody, so I'm assuming that everybody's supportive of that approach. Good, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that, Harjil. Can I move to Carl and probably Linda and team to give us an update on the Treasury Management Strategy? You've all read the paper. Carl has undertaken to do War and Peace in about 6 slides and give us a level of confidence as to the strategy that's being undertaken. So, Carl, I think you're going to put it on screen, are you not?
That's right, thank you, Chair. Morning, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen with you, if you just bear with me 2 seconds.
I think that was the wrong one, Carl.
Yeah, sorry. Gosh, okay.
Still the wrong one.
I've got it, it's fine. Okay, great start. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, thank you for the introduction, Chair. I just have a short presentation which I'll go through in about sort of 3 or 4 minutes. As you mentioned earlier, it accompanies the Treasury Management Strategy that was circulated with the papers. And at the end of this presentation, then I'll just sort of outline some requests from the committee, if that's okay. So just in terms of the definition of Treasury Management, so it's effectively about the management of WMCA's cash flows and banking arrangements. Crucially, it's about effective control of risks, which is why we're having this conversation today at this committee. It's important to note it's not about expenditure as such. It's all to do with the control of WMCA cash and its resources. So in terms of the risks in a sort of Treasury management context, I've just listed out a few risks here. So there's a risk that the Combined Authority could lose some of its deposits by investing in unstable financial institutions, and there's a history of that nationally in 2008 with the Icelandic banking crisis. There's a risk that ineffective Treasury management could mean that WMCA is not able to pay its creditors or its staff on time. There's a risk that we could borrow before we needed to fund our capital programme and therefore incur excessive interest charges. And there's also a risk that an inefficient investment strategy meant that we were missing out on some returns on our investment. So the next slide is about essentially how we mitigate those risks. And the most important thing in our toolkit for managing Treasury management risk is the Treasury management strategy. So it's written in line with CIPFA guidance, who are the Chartered Institute for Public Finance and Accountancy, and it establishes the parameters and the boundaries for which finance officers such as myself and Linda will operate. And I think these are the key things that it's important to pull out from the papers that was sent with the agenda. So in terms of what the Treasury Management Strategy seeks to establish, it will establish a minimum financial strength for institutions for WMCA to invest in. So typically we wouldn't invest in any institutions that had a credit quality score of less than A-. It sets some explicit cash limits to ensure that the exposure to loss is limited in the event that some of those financial institutions might become insolvent. It will set limits around the maximum investment terms. So, for example, WMCA would only ever seek to have a maximum of £10 million invested for a duration of more than 1 year. It sets out the financial instruments that WMCA will and will not utilise. So WMCA will invest in call accounts, for example, but we do not deal in things like derivatives. It sets out the long-term borrowing expectations in accordance with the budget that also accompanies the Treasury Management Strategy to ensure that those are affordable. It will set out the institutions that WMCA will borrow from. So typically that will be UK banks and UK government. It sets out the risks forecast over the next 12 months with a sort of view on the external context. So the Treasury management strategy we've seen talks a little bit about the potential for negative interest rates and how the combined authority might deal with that occurrence if it materialised. It also sets some performance indicators which ensure that we're able to manage and monitor and report Treasury management performance throughout the year. And crucially, it's approved by the WMCA board annually in February alongside with the budget. There are some other mitigations outside the Treasury management strategy that we implement in terms of Treasury management risk control. So one of these is to increase the transparency by delegating responsibility for implementation and regular monitoring of the Treasury management policies to this committee, beginning with the 2021 strategy. We adhere to all of the CITFA code, including providing 3 updates to the WMCA board. That includes the strategy, mid-year update, and then the out-term report. We clearly ensure that all staff appointed into post possess the relevant skills and experience to undertake the activity effectively. There are frequent meetings of a Treasury management group with Linda as Finance Director to talk about pertinent Treasury matters. And also, in line with the local authorities, we will appoint sector specialists for advice and support in real time on things like the rating of financial institutions and how those change over time. So in terms of the input required from this committee today, I think I would like you all to note the Treasury management strategy approved by board in February, as circulated with the agenda. Just to provide any comments or observations regarding the Treasury management strategy to help us shape future strategies. To agree to receive further report detailing progress in implementing and adhering to the strategy at the mid-year point. To review and endorse the 2021 Treasury Management at a future meeting of this committee when that's ready to be submitted, and then to agree to continue to receive specific professional training around Treasury Management activities, again at a future meeting of this committee. So that draws to a close my presentation. I'm happy to pick up any specific questions or comments.
Okay, can I look around the room? Hands to see if anybody has any points. I've got a couple I want to raise, but Ram?
Thank you, Chair. Just a simple question. It's the issue of, obviously, I'm not an accountant or anything. Just to understand the overall picture, that there's no danger of section 141 of which they're getting notice of that at any chance. It's just a simple assurance on this.
So I'll probably hand over to Linda to answer that question in terms of section 114.
141.
I'm so sorry, I really struggled to hear the question at that point. What was the question?
I'll repeat it. Have we got the overall management in such a place that we don't have to worry at all, or we haven't got the financial, or we have financial resilience that we are not likely to receive 141 notice?
Yeah, sorry. So I think that we referenced that in the report of Tim's earlier in the agenda under the financial section of the impact of the pandemic on the authority's finances. So we have, from a cash perspective, we have quite a considerable amount of cash at the minute. So I think the last time we looked, 250 million was the figure that we've got in the bank at the minute, and that is because actually what happens is we get a lot of government money comes in up front right at the beginning of the year. So we're awash with cash at the minute, should I say. So I'm not worried from a cash perspective at all, and that's enabling us to do things like we were talking about earlier about me being confident that I can continue to pay all our suppliers on immediate payment, etc., because we have the cash to do that. And then in accordance with the report that we took earlier, I am happy and comfortable at the minute that we have sufficient financial resilience on our balance sheet and in our forward financial projection for this year that it is not sufficient to trigger or the need for a section 114 notice. I've reported that to the CA board. I will be reporting that to them again in September, that I do not feel that we need to at this point. But obviously, we like all the other local authorities need to be looking at our financial position going into next year, and that's what we talked about earlier in terms of the ongoing discussions with the mayor and the deputy mayor around the finance portfolio lead and the Met leaders around actually what are we going to do going into next year, because there is a funding gap in next year. But at this stage, I'm comfortable that there isn't one required.
Thanks, Linda. Just want to understand why I did raise the question. Is on page 58. There's a table of forecast going further, and then I thought, wow, there's a 131 million loan, and so on. And how are we in a position that we can manage this in a right way?
Yes. So all of our borrowing assumptions, or all of our capital programs are fully funded at this point. So that they're assumed to be funded by borrowing, but the payment for that borrowing is fully funded, and that is through the gain share, the 36.5 million gain share money that we get from central government. And you'll be aware that what that was doing, it's buying £1 billion worth of capital investment over the next 5 years, and we've currently capped that level to the buying power of that 36.5 million grant at 801 million, and that's managed through the investment board, and they manage that. So I'm comfortable that actually as we move forward, we have capped that capital expenditure, and yes, our treasury management strategy does move us from having surplus cash this year to ultimately we will move into needing to borrow up to £800 million in the next 4 to 5 years, or however long Carl's projected it for. I haven't got the table in front of me. But that borrowing is fully underwritten by that gain share in terms of the repayment of that money. So we're currently looking and working with our Treasury advisors, because obviously I'm not just going to turn up and go to PWLB and borrow 800 million at some point. So we are working with our Treasury advisors in terms of what are our options for how we may want to finance that money. So that could be a bond issue. It could be going elsewhere to a third party bank. We don't have to go to PWLB. The issue we've got at the minute, and clearly there's opportunities around our infrastructure, because a lot of that is green and sustainable. So it may be that we utilise a green bond of some sort, but we're working that through at the minute in terms of how we will finance that 800 million, and that will be reflected in future Treasury updates.
Thanks, Linda.
Thank you. Are you happy with that, Ram?
Yes, Chair, I'm happy. Thank you.
Thank you. To raise the point, I think it's probably for you, Linda, but treasury management review, treasury management strategy review with ARAC. No matter how good your training is, we're part-time amateurs with a capital A. I would like you offline to go away and think about how ARAC might receive some independent advice each year. Enables us, when we review it, to add value in the debate, as opposed to just looking at it and being reassured by you, but not knowing enough. We get that independent advice regarding the accounts through external audit, and I think if we are to do our job properly, we should be receiving some independent advice from an independent body on the treasury management strategy that enables us to add value and give back to the board and any thoughts that we have before they are asked to approve it.
Absolutely, yep. Right thing to do entirely, and the right thing to request. Obviously, you do get assurance through external audit, through their audit of the accounts, but also the key financial systems audit is undertaken by Peter and the internal team every year, and Peter undertakes a key financial systems audit of the Treasury function itself, and Peter will report back to you on an annual basis in terms of the robustness of our systems and our processes and controls. In terms of the independent assurance, we'll talk to our Treasury advisors. So we utilise Arlene Close. And I'm sure that we've brought them in before in terms of being able to give members updates around Treasury training and assurance. So I'm sure we'll take that offline and make sure we get an independent advisor back in to help do that.
Thank you. Could you, for the next meeting, could you just produce a short paper that enables ARAC to see how, so that we have confidence in the task that we've been given and therefore is a lack of support that we will receive to be able to do the job.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I take no other questions from colleagues, so I hand to Peter. Now, I'm going to summarise Peter's job. They have one audit report with substantial findings, so according to our rules, we don't see it, because if there's no recommendations and it's substantial, it doesn't need to come to us. And there's another booking, but haven't yet come through in their final form. They're due at the October meeting. Unless there's an update, then I think that's a reasonable summary to be in. The issue that I would like to see addressed most, Peter, by yourself, is the resourcing.
Okay, thank you, David. You've sort of covered a little bit of what I was going to say, but basically this report just brings the committee up to date with the progress of the work of internal audit. And as David's already mentioned, since we last met in July, we've completed 4 pieces of work around 5G governance, single commissioning framework, trams procurement, project management, and the sprint arrangements. In one of those cases, we've issued a final report, which was substantial assurance, as David's already mentioned, hence why it's not come before the committee in its entirety. But if any particular member of ARAC wants to have sight of that report, they're more than welcome to. The other 3 reports are a mixture of satisfactory and substantial assurance reports. So again, not too many issues being raised in them. They are at draft stage. We're looking to get those finalised with the CA and get them presented to you at your October meeting. We've also got 3 other pieces of work that we've just started. 2 around the Combined Authorities' response to COVID with regards to procurement and employee management, and the Commonwealth Games Strategic Transport Plan. We started the planning, and tomorrow morning, because myself and Sandra are both members of the organising committee for the Commonwealth Games' Integrated Assurance Group, we've got a catch-up meeting tomorrow, which is basically all the agencies, third-party agencies, partnerships involved in the Commonwealth Games. It's their internal audit teams all get together and share their experiences and where progress is or isn't being made. And on that group, there's members of the organising committee, there's auditors from the Department for Culture, Media and Sports, PwC, who are actually the internal auditors for the organising committee, West Midlands Police attend, as do Birmingham City Council. So as part of that, we've already highlighted to them that we're about to start that audit, and I think the CA have mentioned to us that the OC have been in contact directly with them as well. So we'll make sure that there's no duplication in that work that we do. And those 3 pieces of work that we've just started, we plan to bring to your January meeting. Further down the page in our report, you'll see there's a whole raft of other audits that we plan to bring to the January ARAC meeting. While there looks a lot, I would say that they are all the key financial systems. So we tend to do those all in one go in their entirety within the finance team. So those are relatively straightforward. And as Linda's already mentioned, it is a review incorporated within on Treasury management, where we just look for compliance with the Council's strategy, policies and processes. And again, if there is going to be an independent review, there may not be time for us to take into account the outcome of that for this year's key financial system work, but we could obviously carry that forward and take that into account in future years. Then there's a handful of audits that we plan to bring to your April ARAC meeting, and then risk management in June. And as David mentioned at the very start of this meeting, a couple of hours ago, that we have had a meeting with Tim and the CA team to make sure that each of the reviews will be completed within the agreed timescales on both our sides. The CA have kindly offered us the support of Lorraine Crubell, who some of you may know. She's got a new role as sort of an internal audit liaison officer. She's going to work closely with us, particularly with regards to following up the implementation of previous recommendations, which in itself can be time consuming because they tend to be spread across the whole CA. So hopefully that will see a sort of faster turnaround in those areas, and ultimately that just gives you an overall summary of where we are at the moment. And we believe we have got the resources and the processes in place to get those delivered for the annual report, which you'll require towards the end of the 2021 year. Happy to try and answer any questions on those. Sandra's also on the call, so if anybody's got any detailed questions on the individual reviews, I'm sure she'll chip in and try her best to answer those as well. Thank you.
Can I throw the floor open? Are there any questions? Can I just put on notice, Peter and Sandra, that colleagues and I still have concerns over whether resources there because of the tendency for work to get pushed back in terms of reporting. And what we will want to do is to make sure that we are that is shown here. And in future, I think what we would like to do when we see the plan particular year, we don't see the dates that you're committing to for doing the work. We see the date that you commit to reporting it. And that failure to report on time will start to indicate to us that there is a problem over resourcing. Right. I remain hopeful, but less than convinced as yet that we necessarily have the adequate resource because things still get pushed back. And I think one of the areas that we must have as a concern, if we're to do our job properly over governance, is to make sure that things are being reported quickly enough for any commentary from our act to be timely. And things not just taking too long to get to us. Okay. Does anybody want to add to that, or I think it is read that I'm speaking for us all? So nobody's dissented. So at that point in time, no questions for Peter and Sandra. I think I'm about a minute and a half over the end of the meeting. I plan to close the meeting unless anybody has anything